Thanks for coming out. My name is Beth Kerr. I'm the Theater and Dance Librarian here in the Fine Arts Library. And today I'm thrilled beyond belief to have Libby Smigel come. Smigel, yes. She is at the Library of Congress now, but before that she was the Executive Director of Dance Heritage Coalition, longtime librarian as well. So I feel like she's with us on the archiving front, and I wanted her to come and talk a little bit about just what things to think about when you're trying to archive your own dance or working for someone else to archive their dance maybe, and the connections with libraries. I don't know if we'll get there yet or not, but anyway, I have a little survey there that's just some questions to think about. You can fill it out and give it back to me if you wish, or keep it for your own reference, make notes on it, that kind of thing. And with that, I think I'll give you Libby. Thanks,
Great,
Libby.
thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. And I also want to thank Beth, because yesterday she was at the National Dance Education Organization, a panel that was looking at how we could get digital resources to students. And that's actually one of the motivations too for me to be here, because before I started working in preservation and archiving, I was a faculty person mostly teaching introduction to dance and dance history. And I have to say that the shadow of New York City falls across 50 states. And now that I'm the nation's dance archivist, because there's only one of me and I'm your tax dollars at work, I want to make sure that Austin's dance, San Antonio's, Dallas, Houston, and all of Texas can be studied and celebrated and transmitted so that you have a history and you're part of the American dance history, not just Texas's, but to make you accessible nationwide. And I think that that's really what's motivating me to drive up from San Antonio this morning, and I only got turned around once. But I'm really delighted that you're all here, and I hope any of you who watch this recording later are inspired as well to start saving your legacy. I've titled this, this is not the title that Beth gave me, but there's been a sea change in archiving, and it used to be very top-down, and it was the archivists, it was the curators, it was New York Public Library's dance division. We're going to set the standards, and we organize the stuff, and what they really weren't thinking about is the fact that this couldn't be less interesting to artists or even to faculty. You're just trying to do your own mission critical things. You have to put on a show. You have deadlines for that, and not enough time and staff and money for that, let alone having us come in and say, oh, and by the way, the humidity in your archival storage must be at this %. I mean, you've got studios where they sweat. It's likely that in your whole building you don't have the best ideal environmental storage. So when I was at Dance Heritage Coalition, I'm going on a little storytelling for this, and I'll share some of the agonies and the ecstasies of my 7 years there. What we discovered was that when an artist got a major grant from a funder to do their legacy planning, they went, oh, this means I'm no longer seen as creative. I'm at the end of my career. I am going to end up in dusty boxes in some dark shelf. Darkness being very good for archival papers. But in fact, when we started working with the artists, we discovered that if we were listening to them, we could figure out how they could repurpose their legacies, use them for their current missions. And we also discovered that some of the trauma might have been averted if we had simply said, if you figure out a really good way of just managing what's coming in from day to day, It's great for your day-to-day mission critical, and it's going to set you up for your long-term legacy planning. But before I do that, I also have to come clean and say, one of the other troubling things is that people sometimes die or their careers end in a way that can't be celebrated because they don't have a will or a power of attorney. And I have to say and plead with you all that no matter, please think about this for your families and friends or whoever you want to pass things on to. And where I have to come clean as I go. And I will try to go back to Washington and do the same. I have parents who are 98, and I've been much more concerned about their record keeping than my own. My basements are going to rival some of the bad stuff you're going to see in the pictures. So if you are embarrassed about, your records, your papers, the mess of tapes that you have in your back room, don't worry, we're probably all here with similar Achilles heels. So what I want you to think about as we go through this is, what is artist-driven archiving? What do you want for your legacy? Do you have to save everything? Are you ashamed or would rather have slept in the day you choreographed a certain piece and don't really feel like turning it over for some overzealous grad student to write some critical thing 10 years that'll embarrass your grandchildren? I don't know. But think about, what is it that how do you want to make your archiving imprint and transmit and get other people excited about using your materials? So think about your voice, and this is sort of my liturgical message: to be not afraid. Okay, there's really nothing, at least I know I worry about Houston, but the devastation in the Graham basement after Hurricane Sandy, where they lost over $5 million valued in materials, these things do happen. It happened in Katrina. There was a lot of jazz material that was lost and instruments. So a little forward thinking. Insurance doesn't replace everything because it doesn't replace unique items. But I suspect that things are in much better shape than you even may think. And so let's try to see if we can move this into a positive way. So I'm starting here, which is really in the middle of the story. One of the things that we discovered when we received some money at Dance Heritage Coalition to go and start talking to artists and find out where their stuff was and what they wanted to do and what their priorities were, is that we heard again and again that they went, the videos are awful. My best friend didn't know how to set my white balance, and it's in the back of the theater and you don't see, it's not a very good recording. And so they had all these problems of just even the way things were shot, or the lack of technology that sometimes artists have available to them. What they would say, and this was from individual artists through to very well-known national artists, would say, it's my creative process. I want to pass up on my creative process. How I get an idea, how I transmit this, how I work with my dancers is what's important. And then we'd say the follow-up question, which was, well, how do you transmit that? Do you have the documents that show that? And they'd go, I don't know. And it got them rethinking. And this is something, too, that some of you may be teaching in colleges or, working with emerging choreographers. Ask them to start being cognizant, aware, thinking about what is it that you have to go through from step one, whether you're signing up for a course in choreography or you're commissioned to do something for a company. What do you have to do? What are the records that come out of that? And what is it that makes it important to you? In this particular case, you see B.B. Miller back there. I thought I'd try to get at least a few artists who aren't all just in New York City. From her Ohio State project, which was Dance Fort, where she tried to create a website where the dancers themselves could contribute comments about the rehearsals from that day. She also experimented with having a, quote, embedded archivist, which in the time of Desert Storms and all of that is kind of a cool idea to think that there's, an archivist or a critic who's sort of working and noting what's happening because sometimes things happen so fast, you need somebody who's not involved in the middle of your rehearsal to actually take some notes. So it could be kind of a dramaturgical function, it could be, or an archival function, but with that idea of saving those records of the creative process. But she was one of the people that was kind of stimulated from having us come and talk to her to actually changing some of the way in which she even started creating. So many of you may still be creating, and you can even incorporate, I hope, some of these ideas in how you go forward. So now you have that sense of how I became involved in helping the dance field. And it's everyone. It is primarily for the purposes here today, artists and dance companies, but we've also been talking to presenters, centers like 92nd Street Y or Clark Center, which are kind of incubation spaces, dance writers and critics and scholars. All of this needs to be safeguarded in a curated way. And here's some of what we learned. Okay, this is a true life photo. I won't mention the name of the artist, but this is a MacArthur Genius Award winner, and this is her off-site storage. Somewhere in upstate New York, we did the site visit in February. You're seeing what we saw, and it was really cold. My colleagues' lips were blue. It doesn't look really too appropriate. It's not heated. And in case you were wondering, yes, it's actually even exposed. There are doors that aren't even there. And more than one artist was keeping materials here. The price was right. However, it looks a little discouraging. Do you think, and this is somebody who actually comes. If you take a look at this, there is organization in this chaos. There is a map of all of this scaffolding and what is in whatever box. But as we took a look, we also would discover there were little critters that had come in from the brutal cold, and it was a little off-putting. I'm betting probably, looking at the faces that look kind of like the Edvard Munch scream, that most of you aren't putting your stuff there. And that's great. So see, we're already doing better than a MacArthur Genius Award winner. Now, I have permission from this company to talk about it. This was a federally funded project with the now defunct National Park Service Save America's Treasures. And the Dance Theater of Harlem got about, through the Dance Heritage Coalition, got about $55,000 to really take a look. And of course, their august history, and this is a major international important dance company. And here's their storage. Again, we've got posters, we've got binders, we have papers in these kind of crunched up folding envelopes. Sometimes there are also some photographs and art, all mixed amongst this. So this was also in a basement that had steam heat pipes running through it, and during the winter time, the heat could be dry and about 90 degrees because it was so cramped and no other way. So not good for paper. Here's a close-up. So they had carefully rolled the posters, although ideally you want your posters always kept flat, if possible. But there's an anecdote with that, and if we have time, I can always tell you about what happens with flat storage and dance companies, but we'll move on from this. But as you can see, it's not just rolled, but it's kind of scrunched. And there are techniques that you can use to, quote, relax the paper, but sometimes when it's really crunched up and also with 90-degree heat, it's not ever going to be the same. So, but this is part of what we have. You probably know some of Dance Theater of Harlem's challenges, that they disbanded the company at an, economic fiasco time in 2004. They're now dancing again, and their legacy to revivify it was part of their attempt to also put the company back together. That's great, but in the meantime, they had lost their archivist, and so things just got jammed in as best they could. They also had an astonishing amount of video recordings. And one of the problems with the popularity and affordability of VHS and some of those non-archival formats is that, I'm sure you've done it because I have done it both for teaching and for performance, is you make a little knockoff of this and you put it on and you put another piece of something else on and then you copy that over and then something else, then you lose your Get Smart episode because you've used an old tape. All of that is not a good idea. I'm sure you know, but we do this because we want to show a piece of something and they get all mixed up with our archival masters. So labeling, you probably find that things are not as clear as they need to be. Try to figure that going forward, get rid of those compilation tapes where you can't even remember which cast was the one that you copied this from, because that also means you don't have the right descriptive metadata or information to even use it again. Because that's, one of the things of repurposing something is you got to know what's on there. And that's more. So they had this lovely office kind of library space, but when we started to sort their videotapes, you can see that it's just out of control. They had estimated maybe 2,000 tapes, and at the point that we ceased work and they were still discovering things in corners that people had walked off with to use, it was more than 4,500 tapes. So, it's so easy. They kind of just grow and spawn. So, and once we got to mini DV, all hope was lost. So, Dance Theater of Harlem's a great example, but we did talk to about 25 different dance companies, not all of them in New York City. We had West Coast and even a Chicago and a Rochester company. Basically, the problem with archiving is that your corporate missions, whether you're an individual choreographer or a faculty person, is that you need to serve your mission-critical needs, your functional needs, whatever that is, teaching, research, promoting, advertising. So that's what you have to do. You don't want to be thinking about the librarians, just kind of shaking their fingers at you later. And then you also need to access the past in order to do your mission. And that's where you can find perhaps the wherewithal to decide, I am going to get this stuff organized so that when we have the intern next summer, that person is not going to organize the way she feels like organizing, but instead will organize according to a system we've already decided. It's great to have volunteer help, but if they don't have the supervision or framework, then you can end up having losing things because they don't understand how you use materials. So as much as we want help, we also have to be sure we're using that responsibly. Also, you're all creating things that you have rights to. So you have to negotiate what is it, what rights have you given away or kept for yourself through contracts, what kinds of things, and I know that artists are concerned oftentimes with having ideas or choreography stolen or repurposed, and I do hope we'll have a chance to talk about that, because I've worked somewhat on rights. But it does mean sometimes you don't want to let it out. You don't want to give it out to a library where somebody could come and watch your videotapes and use it for some other kind of commission. You can, and I would say also about that, if that's the case, you need better friends. We need to have a better sense of responsibility and crediting where ideas and choreography comes from. And of course, the usual ongoing problem, which is that you lack the staff and the resources to organize and safeguard and store records in a trustworthy way that can be replicated. So there we are. The DGH continued working with us because they did decide that they would be more committed to doing the archiving if they had a purpose that suited their mission. And they decided that they could have their archives, that beautiful library space and another space where they were going to show their media, as a cultural destination that would benefit the larger Harlem community. And so that kind of helped them to seek other kinds of funding and to make some decisions with their board behind it to do a better job than just stuffing it into that 90-degree room. So it seems fair to show you some before and after. So we see there on the left, that's some of the most crowded areas. That was also, you can sort of see that's a basement with some of the pipes going through, and it's neat. It's labeled. They took some remediation for the heat, but ultimately that wasn't ever truly addressed. But still, with this kind of better organization, they still were buffered and improved. Okay, that's just another view there. So, and here you have some of the workspaces, and you can see some of the old format video and machines where they would play things. Some of them weren't even functionally being used very well. But doesn't it feel better to think that, even imagine bringing in a funder and showing, or your board members, and showing this, and it's like, oh, they know what they're doing. It gives you confidence. Way too excited there. Okay. So now that you've seen some of the worst cases, I'm hoping you're thinking about what do you have to do. A first step is usually what's called an assessment. And that usually means that you bring in a person or a team who's a trustworthy librarian or conservation person to take a look. We found that if you got a museum person to come in, as kind and as well qualified as they might be, they would not be able to figure out what was actually a sustainable path for a dance company. Because, like in the case of the external storage, we were quoted something like $600,000 to $750,000 to do a museum transfer for that material, because museums want everything to be sterile. And so what we had ended up doing was trying to find out who would help us if there was something like that needed cleaning up. I'm not sure I should say this on a recording, but the two affordable options were crime scene cleanup firms and hoarder firms who would go in and help you with organizing. Probably you'd need a combination of both a little bit, because there would be, at any rate, they decided not to go that route anyway, because so much of it was deteriorated. But it gives you a notion of what the high aspirations are for museums versus what we can reasonably expect to do. With museums, they would never let that library be next to a studio in the Dance Theater of Harlem, which is exactly where it's located. And that's where they kind of went, okay, we can kind of do a community cultural center, but we're never going to be able to do a library or an archive to the specifications that Columbia University or New York Public Library might be trying to do for our pieces. So inventories. The assessment's going to tell you, sort of get a general sense of what you have, what you might be able to do with it, what the challenges are. Let them look under your bed if that's where you keep your VHS tapes. But you also need to, after that, you need an inventory. You really need to know about amounts and formats because some of those things need different kinds of help. So I'm betting that most of you have recordings, analog and probably born digital. Do you have both? All of you who are here, born digital and analog? So if you're, some of the cameras now will just put it right straight to a digital file. It's never had a predecessor. So that's a born digital piece. Sometimes that's also true for, say, now the way people work, and they will type drafts into WordPerfect, or not WordPerfect, that shows my age, but a Word document, or they're using Google and they're typing it straight into the computer and creating a document. There is no handwritten draft, no paper predecessor. So those are all considered born digital. Thank you for asking that. And please do ask questions, because at this point I'm kind of immersed in maybe library speak. So I want to make sure you get it. So, right now you can be creating records, digital projects, oral histories. You may be doing this actively now. And so this is also where you might want some advice at the outset in terms of what is the process, how best, what's the best kind of long-term file for that. Any of you ever hear of digital paper? That was the one that came out and was the rival to PDF format. So if you chose the wrong one, you would be having a hard time right now with your born digital paper thing. So it's just that kind of thing. We just don't know tomorrow. And really, technologies change easily 3 to 5 years, and you're having to migrate to new things. So find trustworthy people and ones that can distinguish between digital access kinds of files and digital long-term preservation quality files. And we'll talk a little bit, I have a section separate just on video because it really has its own challenges. But keep that in mind as we go. Now, what kinds of resources might help you, because I know oftentimes you've got to just stick with the staff, or maybe there's an aspiring local library sciences student that's willing to help out. Be careful sometimes with people who are well-meaning but really don't know the difference between preservation and access. We had people throwing away their master VHS tapes because of a kindly soul migrated them to DVDs, which is a compressed, lossy, non-long-term format. So, be sure that if you can't get a funded assessment and inventory, make sure you're consulting reputable sources. So the Dance Heritage Coalition does have pages on their website, which for the Artist's Legacy Toolkit, which include audiovisual digitization and metadata templates, and also a lot of basic information, and even a whole section on records management, which sort of even precedes archival management. And just so you can sort of see how an archival assessment might work, this is a set of early career library students. Some were still students, others had just graduated, interviewing the Thodas Dance Company's executive director, and they were getting a tour of where they stored their costumes, and they were in pretty good shape. It's a small little company, and they've taken this forward. But they wrote up the document, the preservation and archival assessment, and so sometimes you can get a class. Talk to the people who are teaching at the library schools and say, why not have a project? Assign each of them a different format, because dance companies, well, most performing arts companies have multiple formats. They're going to be, video, yes, but you're going to have other born digital stuff. You have costumes, you have plots, stage plots, maybe stage manager notes, all sorts of things, contracts, correspondence, emails, all of that stuff. And you might have it as a project to sort of put that together for you. So think creatively in terms of how you can get the help. But I know sometimes the help is wanting. But there are, besides the Dance Heritage Coalition, I had to bring along a couple of samples because just because we're dance specific doesn't mean that the larger principles don't apply. So I did bring a couple of the Trifolds that the Society of American Archivists, which has a performing arts roundtable of arts-related archivists, and their little trifolds that they give to people usually who are donating their materials to a repository. And of course, you guys are probably going to be living archives. There may be some things that you want to give now and get them to a safe haven. Maybe you've already digitized them for access now, but you may also feel you've got to keep all this stuff so you're not ready for full-fledged. But this will help you a little bit, even thinking about it. They have a guide to deeds of gift, so you can think about what kind of donor agreement you might like. And what does the donation of organizational records mean? So you can just pass these around. And I'm going to come to a whole section on audiovisual digitization, even in more detail till your eyes glaze over, but I'll just cover a little bit now just in case some of you can't get to the finish line with us today. If you're really doing archival preservation digitization, it's astonishing how much metadata we really recommend you try to get. And of course, what happens when you're videotaping? Oftentimes, if you are taping on a cassette and it's in the dark and you've forgotten to write on the tape itself what the date is, what it is, what's on this particular thing. But if possible, you're wanting to create a kind of spreadsheet, and I don't recommend that you invest in the archival kinds of databases like Archon and Archive Space and collection access that librarians use day to day. We do know of a couple companies that heavily invested in these, and given staff turnovers at dance companies, and certainly if you're an individual, you often don't have access to people who feel comfortable even working with these databases. I mean, I just don't even like access if I don't understand how somebody thought about constructing that database. So what we've usually done is created a spreadsheet, and this is one for AV. You can do spreadsheets, just put it all in the same Excel spreadsheet if you want to, and create similar things for other formats, whether it's your costumes or whether it's your publicity files or your photographs. But since AV seems the most complicated, we sort of are looking at that one. So preferably, you can see what's the company, where have you put that tape, did you give it a unique number? And I really suggest finding a way to get that unique number on there, because that's also going to help you down the line if you start finding a family of tapes. Say, here's your master, here's the knockoffs, and here's one where you just did some excerpts, because if you have to spend some money to digitize an analog tape, you want to have picked the best one and not spend the money on the ones where you go, oh, but I used that for a teaching class and it's not even the full work. Oh, and that was, those kinds of things. So it's a good idea to have that unique number. The title, whether, if it's just a master class, then explain that, but you can sort of see. If you know what the format is, and we gave you a few kinds, sometimes they're DVDs, VHSs, you may have some earlier formats, and if it's a digital format, go ahead and write it down if you can. I mean, sometimes that's beyond what, but even just putting digital file or, digital tape, that's fine too. Choreographic work, title of the music. Those of you who are managing rights, if possible, it's really good to know what those things are there. Place of performance, date of creation, the choreographer, the designer, and it can go on. You'll see if you look down there, we're also saying condition, general notes, generation. There, some of the dance companies we've worked with have a checkbox if there are problems with rights around it because of contracts, just to alert you. So, and I'm going to show you a few others. No, I guess that's going to be the other part. Now here's the Artist's Legacy Toolkit. You can see, it's a little hard to see here, but you can see that it says identify, organize, preserve, access, resources, copyright, digital files. Each one of those tabs has a different set of information. So if you go down and visit the Dance Heritage Coalition website and search from their menu at the top for the Artist Legacy Toolkit, you'll get this kind of information. And those little purple things there are indicating where you can click on them and you can have a legacy tool, which will kind of give you either a something to download, or it can be a definition to help you with what you need. And the message here at the bottom, I can't emphasize this enough. Choose what you want to save. If you are working in a team for a company, obviously that you is a plural. But you do have to figure out these questions. Would the loss of the item decrease understanding of your work? But we've tried to use questions there so that you're making good choices about what you spend your precious time saving and sharing. This is another page from the Artist Legacy Toolkit, and I've typed that Artist Toolkit with the HTML in case you want to just jot it down now. But if you do fill out a form, as Beth had, and if you put your contact information, I'm very happy to send you some things by email that you can, documents and links that you probably will have a hard time just jotting down for this moment. Notice too that what we have done there with the purple links there, early career, mid-career, seasoned artists, because those concerns, what you are both able to do, what you may have generated, is going to need different things for the different points. Down here, how will you need to access your materials? That's a really important thing. And as you see there in the purple, the records management system. And that's where we'll go to the records management page. And there's the direct link to the records management if you want to get down there and write that down now. But basically, records management means, it's your filing structure. And it should be what serves you. We worked with the Silk Road Dance Company, which reconstructs and performs the dances of the Silk Road. Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and for them, it made the most sense to create a filing system which an archivist would never have imposed by country, because some of the dances are similar in some ways, and they felt it's very important for the countries we visit and the people we're working with to make it very clear that we are being extremely careful about our research and about their heritage. It's going to be different for each of you. And that's where it's important for you not to be bullied by a very, well-meaning but misunderstanding archivist that's learned templates in the library system that just don't work for day-to-day organization. So I can't say that enough, but that's really an essential thing. The other thing about file naming and filing structure is that with the way in which digital is so easy to copy over an existing file, I confess I've done it. All of a sudden you go back in and it's an early version. It's like, where did my edits go? This happens. We're all human, but you can at least set up something so your filing system is going to mean that there's less chance of that you know if it's the entire document or the entire dance, you know what date it was as part of the name. Figure out what makes sense to you and what's easy to explain to anyone who is also going to be working with you. Because if they don't get it, you're going to be just as much imperiled. So, okay. Let's take a, why don't we sort of, if you're all dancers, move around a little bit. It's all
You might get to this later, but I'm just thinking you're talking about computer files. Well, I've been dancing, self-producing a lot since the 70s, so I have a lot of hard copy. Now, would you suggest just to scan hard copy files? Would you suggest just to scan those to try to retain their original?
This is a really wonderful question. So if you have combinations now of both paper materials and, of course, you're managing digital assets, and most of you who have been dancing for more than 10 to 20 years, yes, you're going to have a big mixture of things like that. I turn to antiquity for the answer because papyrus has lasted forever. And, the thing about paper is that, unless it's the newspaper that eats itself because it's so brittle, but it tends to actually have a longer shelf life than a digital file. We can talk a little bit about, even though you're copying a file, there are things about bit rot. There can be errors in copying. There are changes of format. I'm sure you've seen also, you change the program that's supposed to open this file, and all of a sudden it doesn't happen anymore. There are hard drive failures. Clouds do blow away, despite what people, anyone who's as old as I am and knows that what GeoCities was decades ago, one fine day people woke up and if your stuff was on GeoCities, it was no more. And I can tell you a terrible thing about an upgrade of our email server at Dance Heritage Coalition, where, the IT company was in the UK and New Zealand, but it was very affordable. But unfortunately, one day we got an email that said, "Congratulations, your system for email has been upgraded." And it turned out that everything in the emails that we had saved, archivally creating a file system for those, the file folders were all empty. Because we were little folks and they were busy, probably had done the same thing with big folks, months went by. And so we had to set up Gmail. How about that? Gmail was, was the answer. But I think we have to realize that as much as digital provides blessings, I also have seen so many curses that, it's kind of like the god Janus with two faces, and you just hope that the digital people smile on you today. So I wouldn't throw out your paper. If digitizing certain things works for you because you can create a website or whatever, I would never throw out the original. Same thing with video, analog video. I mean, we just don't know what's going to happen with the various digitization formats. And, you know, I mentioned the word bit rot. Things do deteriorate in terms of when you're copying things. I mean, the chances are less, but, you know, the sort of archival thing is as many different kinds of formats in as many different places. I mean, it's especially for your one-of-a-kind things, certainly digitize it, but maybe also if it's really rare and like a founding document, you might even want to photocopy it on a kind of bond with 25% cotton in it, you know, or something like that. But now, see, now I've created this thing where you're all going, I can't do that. Yes, I know, I got too excited.
It's almost like we need both. And also to copy any digital files onto paper so that we have.
I would say, you know, this is also where what is really essential. Are there things that if they disappeared because it was a contract that was sent and signed, you know, in a PDF, I'd still want an original somewhere. You know, it's like we wouldn't just leave our will, I don't think, we wouldn't leave our signed wills in a PDF and hope that, you know, the lawyer, should something happen, would somehow or other remember how to find this so that, you know, the executor isn't, you know, troubled for eons after. What? Oh. She's looking frightened as well. But it's, you know, but this also means please don't photocopy Post-it notes. You know, I mean, because some people, it's like, oh, it's in our founder's hand, that, you know, this Post-it note, and they get very fond. But, you know, let's make realistic decisions. What is it really that's going to be exciting in an exhibit, exciting for students who are coming into their school to see, here's the founder and this is his photo as a little kid or whatever it is. I mean, you want maybe the original, maybe you also want to digitize the negative. If it's really important, find a really good way to keep that thing. But, you know, there's a lot of stuff that probably, you know, you've maybe not even decided, you haven't looked at it. If you haven't looked at it, you know that those professional organizers who come in and they clean out your closet, say if you haven't read it, you know, worn it in a year, you're not going to wear it and all that stuff. I mean, you don't have to be that rigorous, but I think if you have not needed to look at it for 20 years and you're even, you know, it's not well labeled and you have no way, you know, well, give it some thought about whether this file folder is really important. Yeah. Are there any other questions or thoughts at this point? Because I'm here to really be helpful to you, and you know, I made some decisions about what to show you, but you may have pressing issues. You may have a challenge, you know. A recent thing was, you know, with the Martha Graham lawsuit where she had the will and gave all of her materials to her close assistant, Ron Protus. And he decided to take everything, and he closed down the company and the school, and, you know, he thought that meant he really was it. Do you all recall any? See, you're not on the East Coast and the frantic New York community. That's nice. I'm so glad. But what the interesting thing was is that the lawsuit said she didn't have the right to give it to Ron Protus. She was in fact salaried by her 501c3. All of her creative work product was really the companies and the schools. And they did find archival documents that even showed that, because she had, in the Martha Graham archival collection, she had written a handwritten note to her mom going, you have no idea what a relief it is not to have to be trying to figure out how to pay myself. I'm on salary. And it's like, aha. So that supported the school and the company, and so he got Martha's book collection, her stuff from her sister. You know, there were a lot of personal items that he received, but it wasn't the entire school and the rights to her choreography and all of that. And that's why the Martha Graham Company can continue. So you see, a letter like that, you might not even think that that was really even up to much. a little handwritten note to her mother means charming, but, and here it is. This changed how New York does dance because Paul Taylor went, I'd always thought that my dances were mine, that I could set them anywhere. No, in fact, it's the board and the administration that can say if it gets set somewhere. You can write an agreement that says royalties after you retire are going to go to you. And a lot of the major companies then did, in fact, write down, this is what you get. You got that Tony Award, you got that Bessie, you got, the Oscar nomination certificate, whatever it was. Yeah, you get to keep that. That's you. But this is the stuff that the company has. And some of them also then decided, if our founder wants to put his personal stuff here, wouldn't it make sense for the company to put our stuff there too? But they're very careful to have that demarcation. So that's kind of off what you were asking. But it's that kind of thing where, just sort of an anecdote that says, think about what does this letter, this item represent? I mean, that's actually a case that changed law and practice. And, now it's sort of understood. Make it clear whether they have the right to set your piece on another company or a school. Okay. Any other little thoughts? Did I kind of? Yeah, I know it was a very squishy answer.
Getting more and more questions though as you talk. So if you
Well, yes, and I'll give you my email address.
I don't want to take up other people's questions, but, okay, so I'm not a nonprofit. My file is sole proprietor, and I do have donations. I do it through an umbrella. So I still have the rights to all my stuff, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then if I'm still living, still working, and I decide I do want to start to donate my materials,
Yes. Right. Yes.
do I lose, do they then have, or is this a whole nother?
No, that's a great thing to talk about because there is a difference between ownership and the rights. So you can give the physical asset, the physical item, to, for example, the Library of Congress. And, then I organize it, I preserve it, I create an index for it. But if someone comes and says, I saw this, I came and studied this, and I would like to use this photograph of you and your work in my book, and we also see there's a photographer's name, we would say, we don't know whether the photographer transferred the rights to you. You're going to need to go back to you and say who owns the rights to the photographic image for publishing or for that sort of thing. So usually, and some people do transfer their rights at the point that they really just, it's like, please take it and use it and celebrate it and, don't call me, I'll call you. That's okay too, but in your case, you want to make sure that you don't transfer your rights. And that's where the deed of gift comes, which is in that trifold. And you can decide how much leeway that the repository has to create access and what do they tell people who come in and need to use materials. The other thing is there's some confusion about performance rights. Usually libraries want nothing to do with performance rights. It's always go back to the choreographer or go back to the company. That's a whole different contractual thing. We might like to have your videotapes so that people for study and research can come and see, especially if it's your seminal work or whatever, or if we want to put a clip in an exhibit or such thing. But as far as it's like they said, I love that. I think my students, my senior year BFA students would probably love to do that piece. Then it's like, go and see if you'll get the rights. And then you can do whatever you want to with, your contract to whether you have to set it, whether, and by the way, when it comes to the copyright law, there are fair use protections for teaching and research. We can talk about that more, so that scholars can write and publish, and, young up-and-coming students of all ages can learn about America's history and culture. But ultimately, if you restrict something, like if you were to say, no faculty can see this until 5 years after my death, and I do know of a case where the artist has donated their materials but can't be seen till 5 years after her death, I don't think I would have taken that collection, actually. That's my personal feeling about the importance of my mission, which is to not just save stuff, but celebrate it. But they did. And so because they agreed in a contract, that fair use stuff protection in the Copyright Act doesn't apply because contracts trump the copyright fair use exception. So that's probably, I can see you glazing over. Okay, enough about rights. We will turn now to what are the rewards? Because now I want to really get you thinking about why you would even commit resources and time that you don't have. So one of the things that was lovely about Dance Theater of Harlem is that they discovered things that they thought they had lost. We found their costume Bible that went long ago. We found the Ferragamo designs, actually the costumes for their Firebird. I mean, that kind of thing, even when I talk about it, I still get goosebumps when you kind of go into this kind of warehouse office thing and you go, my God, what's in this box? And you're just pulling out these things and you're really glad that they are in pretty good shape. So, so that worked out pretty well. And here we have, a music score, handwritten. These kinds of things really get people maybe who aren't in your company or you after you've seen them time and again, they get you really excited. And I have some at the Library of Congress too. It's like pulling out Judith Jameson's Parasol from Revelations. It's just, it's like, oh, everybody gets really excited. And we have some odd things too, like someone's dentures that got put in there. That stuff, not so much, but, And, so, and you see the design there by, for another one of the designs themselves, not just the costumes. So you may, in fact, find things that you thought you lost. And you might, in seeing them, go, that gives me an idea of what we can do, because this was important enough at the time, and now it needs to be celebrated. And so now we're coming back here. And this was where we started at the middle of the story, and now she really has new ways of working. So one of the impacts was in terms of knowing what she had, and she also knew what she wished she had. And so then her work process has even shifted a little to make sure she generates what she wants. And so here's kind of a small list. Repurposing legacy materials, capturing the creative process, documenting shared creative spaces, and here are a few examples. So we did create a blog called one of the WordPress blogs called Artist-Driven Archives, which is all about really putting the artist, not the archivist, in the driver's seat. And you can probably recognize David Gordon and his chair in the middle there, archiving artistic legacy. And it isn't because he's done some oral histories and released him. I think it is safe for me to be able to share with you that he was really kind of ticked off that he was there in the 60s and 70s experimenting away, and he'd been really persuaded by the Judson and other community people that you just don't tell your audience anything. You credit the dancers or whatever, but you leave them in the dark about what was it that inspired this. And he reconstructed his famous chair dance during that NEA choreography grant program, and some faculty scholar came up and was like, oh, the chair dance, and it's this cool minimalist, and started tossing around all of these, flavor of the day, trendy, theoretical lenses that they were seeing this in. And probably some of you know or have interacted with David, who's quite a character and a very strong figure. And he basically said, well, that's not it. I'm saying it in a more gentle Libby way. But he then told us about this incident when we came in to help him and start the archiving. And it turned out that his wife, Valda Satterfield, who had been dancing with Merce Cunningham, had been in an accident. And the company had gone off to tour without her. And he gives a whole oral rendition of the story. He's created this from rediscovering sort of his legacy about walking with her to the rehearsal space, feeling her response, hearing traffic noises, and going in and starting to work with her in such a way that he heard her laugh for the first time in a long time. And I'm going, this is a love dance. And he said that dance had to be not about what she had lost. So he had us, But that's the kind of thing sometimes that you've overlooked at the time of creation. And when you go back, you can add something that, now it's like, I'm both in love with him and in love with the dance, and, and it's the kind of thing that adds to the transmission and the story. And probably every single one of you has a moment of working together or discovery that isn't on the stage, that's an essential part of what it is that made you the artist that you are. And that's something that I'd say, think about that. You'll discover that. You might not want to share it right away, but for you to kind of come to that knowledge, because we're all just going so fast that we sometimes forget to notice those. But David being David, he created this whole archivography out of this, and has really celebrated this. And this was the guy who was truly, when Mellon gave him the money for the archival assessment, was like, they think my creative life is over. And instead, he's built a whole different approach, which I think is sort of one of the success stories, that he was open to rediscovery. And there he is again. And there's Libby. You've seen her before. You see her. And this is just a little moment about the embedded archivist, because we got some blog postings from a woman at Ohio State who was the embedded archivist, and it added her voice to the creative process. And sometimes there are important creative spaces. 92nd Street Y, Clark Center, you may have some here where it's really served a number of artists. And the interesting thing, and sometimes it's the place at your university, because the faculty have had a stable place to create, and you've been recording their work, and you have their syllabi, and you have, and you have all of those people who've come out who've been affected by studying with various people. All of those kind of inter-choreographic lineages, if you will, that goes out. And that's a really interesting way to see what are the effects of, the working with different talents and in different creative ways. I loved this one. Philadelphia never got funding from through the Dance Heritage Coalition so much, but they've really been truly under that shadow from New York City, and they have marvelous dance records there, artists of so many different genres. And the Philadelphia Dance Projects, which originally was more of a presenting umbrella, decided that their local dance history was really important and wanted anybody who had a piece of that to have a place. They're still struggling. Funding is a huge, huge deal. But the thing of it is, they did get at least to some achievements there. They got a little bit of seed money. I hope at some point we can do more for them so they can continue to work. They do have their own local dance history archive at the Paley Library at Temple. But again, staff changes. The woman who really was, wanting that, Mary Edsel, took a job at Catholic U in Washington, and then that energy goes away. And that's one of the dangers of all of these things, whether it's for the dance company or, other places, is that if a key person is really the one that's driving it, what happens? It's not sustainable if there isn't a whole train of energy to continue on. And you can see she went for a very artsy kind of of effect and design. And this sort of shows you that an individual artist can have his or her own page. And there were timelines, there were videos. The vision was huge, maybe a little larger than they could go for originally. But I think it's a wonderful idea to be thinking about how do we come together and show that this is worth taking notice. I had to bring something local. I know that Beth has been trying to work on ways to try to get some of the Austin local talents noticed. And I think this is a marvelous first step, but how to sustain that is they're looking exhausted. But it's not that there isn't some effort happening already. The real question is, I think, how do you want to collaborate, support each other? And that's where maybe it would be a good thing for me to talk a lot. We had 7 companies that we did inventories in New York City and the archival evaluations. And they're probably some of the usual suspects you might be thinking of, from Lubavitch and Dance Theater of Harlem to Mark Morris, a number of fairly well-known, mostly modern companies, except for DTH. And the executive director of La Lubavitch Company said, you know what we really need? We really need a way of doing something peer-to-peer. If I had to get together once a month, touching base somehow, even a conference call or whatever, to keep doing it, I might do a better job at, making sure that we keep, talking to each other. And I think today that there is a sense of where do you get your information, whether you're a bunhead and you want a clarification of a step, do you really go to your teacher, or do you ask the person next to you how to do it? And more we're seeing that the way we get information is from our circle that we think is trustworthy. So in a way, taking away the hierarchy of information coming from archival sciences and all of that, it's good because it puts the artist's voice first and your needs first, but then you have the problem with where's the trustworthy information? How do we verify? Are we getting fake news from our neighbor instead of getting stuff that's really going to sustain us? And I think that that's where, whether it's, with Beth and, certainly the UT Austin Libraries and the Library School have great resources. There are national resources that are online. I am your dance curator and archivist at work. So it's a matter of just making sure if you're going to meet and discuss a problem or a challenge, just touch base. You know, we don't have to be prescriptive because sometimes our prescriptions have not gone well. They have caused people too much anxiety, so they're paralyzed instead of actually implementing. So the issue here is sustainability. What is it that you can do, even if you're doing just 30 minutes a week, to unburden yourself with stuff that, you know, that pile of papers that we all have, you know, but you know there's something in there that you've been trying to look, you know, find for ages. Or does it all just go to recycling? You know, I mean, sometimes we just need to do that too. But I do think we have to figure out how to create the sustainable answer. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So this is the point. I think I'm at the end of my first PowerPoint. Yes, that looks like it. And then I can yeah. Okay. So let's just see if any other percolating questions or issues. This is now we're going to go into video digitization and preservation. I mean, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, for dance, a well-done video could be 1,000,000 words. And badly ones, maybe not so much at all. But this truly is a huge challenge, and it's not just for you all, but it's even for the Library of Congress, because standards are shifting every day. I don't know, have any of you tried to digitize a VHS tape? And when you do, what is the size of about 1 hour of VHS tape? Do you know how many gigabytes it might be? If you are doing lossless preservation, so that you get as much as you can for that Jumbotron celebration of your work, okay, it's 100 gigabytes. Which usually means you can't open it on your personal computer. I can't. If you get, no, that's, yes, so if it's complete uncompressed, it's like 100 gigabytes per hour of VHS tape. And that probably means, too, that you have more than one tape, so the whole idea of the number of hard drives, or, cloud storage, I mean, it would be ridiculous. That's what Library of Congress and New York Public Library and UT Austin, that's what their job is to take on these massive digital files and make copies of them because of that bit rot problem. And there are these interesting drives that check the two sides, like they're mirror drives, to see if there's anything that somehow is deteriorating, to catch it before it's unplayable. I mean, this is the stuff like, I'm going, okay, it's a big problem. I don't want to learn how to fix this. I mean, it's just too technical for me. I'm not going to live long enough. So, you know, so what's your option? You can do lossless compression, which means that, for example, you've seen dances where there might be a spotlight, so there's a dancing figure in a part of a stage and there's a lot of blackness. Well, if you do lossless compression, it means that for that part that seems to be there on each frame, you don't have to reinvent the wheel and preserve all of that. You just use some kind of an algorithm, so you save some extra bits and bytes. You know when you zip a file? Like if you have a bunch of Word documents and you're sending them off or whatever and they're big and you've zipped them, they're doing the same kind of thing. So when you unzip it, it goes back to its normal case. So for dance, we usually can save a good 40%. So now we're down to 600 gigabytes instead, or 60 gigabytes instead of 100 gigabytes per hour. That's good. That's still way too much for most of you. But at least you know that that's whoever it is that needs to take that to make the next digital format that you may need 5 or 10 years down the line, because you don't want to migrate your access copy. So all of your access copies should come from your digital master. So, you know, DVDs, even with your access file. DVDs will even compress some more. So DVDs and these, unless you have gotten the gold ones, do you know that it's like coated with silver? So you know what happens with your needing silver polish? So you can just polish your digital bits and bytes right away. No, I mean, that's basically the metaphor for the bit rot. It basically, DVDs, CDs, not a preservation format. They've been marketed as such oftentimes. Any of you have mini DVs with digital? So, it has like an hour on it, those little mini DVs. Any of you get the hour and a half mini DVs, so it'll help you get to the intermission, so you don't have to change a tape in the dark? Well, the same amount of space is on the reel. So if you have an hour and a half on your thing, it means it's a much more fragile tape because it's thinner. So it's not definite. Well, Mini DV never was archival, but there are some better tape brands. Get it to something else. No, it's sort of this frightening, brave new world where I'm going, I wish I had better answers. I think the answer here is to go whatever someone who would make money off of you is recommending, go and ask some more follow-up questions and not just of your vendor. Just test it out. Oddly, film is really a much more secure format, and unless it's nitrate, in which you'll blow up. But so very early films, we even have them in a separate place in the middle of a rural area, just Packard Money, you Texans. Packard Money has built a state-of-the-art nitrate film place because of the danger. They didn't want to blow up Capitol Hill, where our library is. That Congress wouldn't be happy. So, so they store it somewhere safe. But what about you guys? What is your biggest challenge with video digitization? Whether it's born digital or whether you're trying to handle your analog tapes. Do any of you have things like Betamaxes or 1-inch tapes or open reels? Open reels, yes.
Actually, it was a Nancy Theater workshop, 1878 choreographer showcase, and beating those.
Oh my. So open reels, and some people don't even recognize them. They think they may be just audio tapes because there are a lot of audio open reels. But in fact, they're video formats, and fewer and fewer. This is where if you do have something that you dearly love that is on a 1-inch or a 2-inch, or to try to find a player or an open reel is really very difficult. It is astonishing how well they can get that material off, but understand you want to decide what you really can't live without, that you really want to have as part of you. If it's because the cost adds up so very easily.
I haven't been able to find someone who could digitize it.
There,
Play it.
well, there are some really wonderful things. There are specialists out there who have been even buying stuff on eBay, broken machines, and using them to kind of as the spare parts for their '66 Plymouth in a way, So there are firms that will do this for you, and I'll be happy to help you research that. But anyway, there are out there. We just worked with a really funky 1-inch tape, which was like a prototype 1-inch, even before they started marketing, that may, in fact, get the Anthony Tudor Trust to be able to reconstruct his Romeo and Juliet. So, that's like, oh, finally, that always excites me when it goes to saving something. Sorry, yes.
I was just going to give a shout out. I hope all of the local people know about the Texas
Do you want to come up here and just say it so that they can, the other people also will, in the future?
I was talking about an organization here called the Texas Archive for the Moving Image. It was started by a library school's professor here who was feeling a lot of the same kind of frustration I was about how do I get this into the pipeline, and how can I encourage people to preserve what they have. And what they'll do, my understanding of it, and you might need to check with them for real, but you can bring in stuff, like I think they could probably take in your open reel tape. They would digitize it for you and give you maybe a DVD kind of copy. The caveat is that you have to allow them to put it onto their website. And they're not an archive I mean, they're not a library they're not completists by any means. They probably just want like one dance video that you have, or like one of that one thing. They'll keep it, they'll preserve it. I don't know if I don't think they physically keep the thing, but they'll have their digitized version of it, and then you can have a DVD of it, that kind of thing. So I'll give them a shout out. I was hoping some of them might come today too, but.
No, that's
it.
great. And maybe, if you leave your email addresses and whatever, then when I send you links and things, we can also add some of the local resources, because it's great to get national advice, but ultimately, if you have qualified people locally, go to them first, because they should also be invested in all of you, that, what they're saving. So, but these are really good questions. I'm sure you may have some other feelings. I'm going to sort of scroll through some of these things. We've sort of been talking about a bit of this. I just wanted to remind you of the sheer mass, and remind you again, unique numbers. So, and we talked about using your, the Dance Heritage Coalition's Toolkit, and there are those specific audiovisual templates there. And again, your local libraries or library schools. And, I think we should be talking about how do we connect, Dance USA, Dance Heritage Coalition is merging with Dance USA. Now that I have left there, and they have no nutsy cuckoo person who stays up all night in the office to get grants in. So they're moving in that way, and they have a mission now. They've to accommodate some of what Dance Heritage used to do for artists, and of course, Dance USA represents artists. I mean, it would be reasonable for you to be able to email them and say, what are you doing? Are you convening people? Shall we get together? And I know that there are artist councils. Certainly in Texas you have some. I mean, all of you should be sharing this kind of information and supporting each other, because one of the interesting things is that when it comes to preservation, I think we should be seeing this as a common goal. It's not about you got that tour thing and I did not. I mean, we all have materials, and for anything that is valued by the artist to have been lost because of a lack of information seems to me extremely sad for American culture. So, this is actually maybe something where we don't have to compete so much as we can actually collaborate and do information sharing and, not reinvent the wheel for each artist's attempt to try to save their legacy. And of course, yeah, this is like, watch out for your corner vendors. Finding it all is oftentimes really difficult. If you're in a company, and especially if there's a school or you use tapes to restage, all of a sudden they're in somebody else's office, or even in a corner of that humid studio, which is not where you want to have your recordings, whether they are optical discs like DVDs, or whether they're playable analog tapes. But do try to identify. I mean, clearly you need to know. Also, it's possible 4 molds to grow on tapes. And so if you open up something and see like fuzzy things, especially green seems to be a very favorite color for tape mold, you definitely need to be very careful even about playing that tape on a machine, because you could end up migrating the spores to something else. So there are vendors that have things that in essence clean the tape so that it doesn't transmit. They kind of, it's like the freeze and thaw and whatever. And then there's the shake and bake. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but like with these pneumatic tapes, they often have a sticky shed syndrome, and that means that the image ends up, because of the lubricant of the tape is no longer lubricating over the time, that they need to like have this controlled heating to try to get the lubricant back to where it's supposed to be. And then they are shaking it to like make sure that it's not stuck to the wheel or the whatever that they call on the spool. It's like, see what you gave up to become artists? Oops. Again. Okay. And then we looked at that one sample template, and I'm going to show you a few others. Generations. When we talk about the generations of video, that's where I hope you, whether it's digital or analog, it's really good to know which was the very first, and then which one, and then what are the copies, and is it a copy of a copy? Is it a complete one? And librarian people talk about a controlled vocabulary for consistency. You know what? There is no library controlled vocabulary for dance, so we may as well make up our own. So it's really whatever you consistently use. So as long as you know what that means, then that's okay. So that, if you have a shorthand for saying how, excerpts or what the subject is or the genre, use that. And then distinguishing content, very important. And so I think we saw this one. But here's one, and it looks like the Excel spreadsheet. It is. And basically we created this. These are even downloadable if you want to see and then edit them and take out fields that you don't feel are important. But basically, the reason it says barcode there, we did some digitization. We actually did have a barcode to put on every one, but you don't need that. As long as you have the unique identifier, you're really fine. And then if you start with count, it helps you count them too. And this was one. This is where we're getting into. This is what it starts looking like when you get Preservation Digital Archivist. You've got all of these strange ways of system. As long as they know what it is, you may decide that's what you want to do. That's fine. But obviously, it depends on whether you want to be able to train an intern in a summer. But again, there's lots and lots. In this particular case, they were, I would say that, you see the label there? It is helpful sometimes for you to have the fields so that you have performer, names of works, date. But what's wonderful about D, that column, the title of item from label, this is what somebody scribbled on it. Because sometimes, even though it has a unique number or whatever it is, this is what that person remembers was on there. And so it's a way of kind of, taking what was original, and sometimes there's a piece of information there that isn't in your other columns, but you might want to, it might be that it was this particular cast, or it may have an X because that was the premiere, and this actually was the case, somebody fell in the premiere and they didn't want to digitize and use that one. But whatever it is, it's good to kind of make sure, because otherwise, your intern's going to come and it's like, let's we want to show this dance, and then they've picked the first one, which would seem logical. But, there'd be no way for them to maybe know that. So just consider all of those, how do we save ourselves? Here's another case with video metadata. You can see this one, you can actually, this was with Mark Morris Dance Group, and they received a significant grant to get their archives up, and they had huge numbers, not just of video, but also music, because you may know that he prefers almost exclusively to perform to live music. So they also would have multiple versions of the live, so that they were used to rehearsing, even when they had to use recordings of different tempos, because we just can't get it exactly the same. So, but you can see here, I have to say, shout out to his executive director. She's like a chihuahua with detail, because it's like nothing's going to get past. I'd like her to proofread anything I ever write. And, she had this amazingly ambitious idea of how to do this. I wouldn't suggest this for anyone who doesn't have a very deep staff and support system. But, she was going to get it right. And, it was one of the cleanest collaborations that we were to do. And she did also, you write grants and sometimes there's slippage. We kind of said we were going to do that, but, did that how she was attention to detail extraordinaire. So, which also, it's really wonderful to collaborate when you see that kind of integrity and sense of purpose. Okay. So if you have 4,500 tapes and not a lot of money, what are your seminal works? What are your most endangered tapes? So there are two things. So content choice is important, but also what's endangered. As you said, if you have an open reel tape, the length of time that's going to be able to be digitized. If you really like that, that would also get a priority mark, because it's a form that's disappearing. What's the best version? Not the one where the person fell down. What format should you digitize? If you started with analog, unless you've really mistreated your analog or use the pause button a lot, which takes the information off, probably your analog is better. It looked like you might have had a thought. Yes, and oh, good question, because I've just. Yes. Okay. Analog tapes mean that, like with digital, you can put in a timestamp and you can go right to wherever that next time step is. You don't have to roll it forward. So an analog tape is one that, usually not digital, that has to roll through. So it's truly a linear kind of experience. So yes, and usually those are the earlier tapes. Interestingly, they often have, even with VHS, much more information than a compressed DVD. So unless, it's been in the basement and has the mold and they used it in the studio and kept pressing. I did this with the Morse Pavane on a tape I have, a commercial one. I'd always press when I was teaching with it, and it's like erased some frames, because it's pushing the heads against that. And so that magnetized information's coming off. Also, keep away from magnets. There were tapes that have been submitted to, for copyright deposit or that we get at the Library of Congress, and they have been demagnetized. So there's nothing really much on them. So, so assume that, there are all these potential hazards. So, but otherwise, if you haven't demagnetized and it's not been an abused tape, then probably the analog. You're thinking?
I'm confused. What format should be digitized? And then you say analog is better. Isn't that contrary? I mean, how do you
Yes.
digitize analog?
Okay. Badly worded question. Because what I mean is, if you have a bunch of formats of this work, which one should you choose for digitizing? Yes. So it's not what format do you digitize to, but which one have you chosen? So yes, bad, Libby. Yeah, not clear. And then yes, next we'll be considering what format do you want to take it to. And I'm not the expert, and things can change on this. And so, and also, yes, what would the impact of creating access by digitizing have? That's going to be somewhat about the priorities, those repurposing ideas. Which ones are really special can you see being part of your 20th anniversary celebration or whatever it is? What has to come first? And then at those celebrations, you find the funders for the next phase, because you can say, you liked this exhibit? We could do so much more if we could have the money to digitize some more. See? Okay, your media type, film, video, optical is often a word that's used for CDs and DVDs. It's the flat file, those discs. And then born digital files. Film formats, this is where all of you are going to glaze over. There is actually a lot of time spent at the Library of Congress opening archival boxes of things and trying to figure out which format. If you have ever had a PAL tape, it looks just like a VHS, but it will not play on your VHS machines. And that's just a small number. But you know, all of these film formats, and we wonder, you know, why we're having such trouble digitizing all of American culture. Video formats, and these are just examples. There have been other versions of that. So you're looking at, you know, 2-inch, 1-inch, 1-inch open reel, 1-inch tape, 1/2-inch open reel, all of these, but there are people who do have these. And if you've got stuff on the right-hand side there, they do need to be digitized or transferred soon. So most of those are considered really imperiled formats. High 8, Super 8, all of those kinds of things. The tape itself wasn't very well conceived. Or laser disc, they thought that was going to be the wave of the future. CD, DVD, Blu-ray, but basically remember all of those, unless your very short dance is uncompressed or losslessly compressed, it's not going to fit on a DVD. So just remember that. That's mostly just good for access. And then these are the electronic file formats, and it's certain that these kinds of things are going to change over time. But, you know, I really don't feel comfortable recommending things, but you can see that there are pejorative words like lossy, which means it's going to be an access format. You can use it on your computer. You can stream it. But if you really want to think about even a TV documentary, you know, that you're going to put on a screen of any sort, it's going to look very pixelated and not make you happy. Codecs are things that are tossed around. This is where we're really getting into preservation technology. This is like the wrapper for the video file. And it provides the information for how the file ends up getting played. And there are different ways that they organize that information. But the best way I think of it is, you know, it's kind of like the packaging in the store. You know, the crackers are inside. Is it in a cellophane bag? You know, is it in a box? And it's kind of, you know, but basically the digital file's inside, but it's how it gets conveyed. It kind of holds on to it. But, I mean, Sometimes people talk about codecs when they mean file formats. And that's why I just wanted to alert you that they're actually two different things, the file format and then the wrapper. And then storage for all of your stuff. You know, no 90 degrees. Look at the relative humidity for videos, 35 to 45%. So you don't want it in a damp basement or exposed to the air in upstate New York winters. And if you have to make choices, it's consistency rather than, trying to hit the best thing sometimes. So anyway, that's sort of, and some people don't realize that storing your videos flat, the ones in the case, not a good idea. They shouldn't be taking weight. They should be sitting on their edge. Doesn't matter which edge, but don't leave them flat, whereas film is flat. Film can be stacked. But, I guess it creates a problem with the spools and the playing because of the compression. Oh, yes, there's sort of a semi-moldy one over there, just so you can see. For the assessment, ideally, if you're digitizing, they'll say, okay, it's a 1 hour tape. Do you think you have an hour of information on it? And you're not going to know, Don't feel bad. Just, sometimes you've probably even put a bit of black or bands at the beginning, just so that that part that gets stretched so much doesn't get destroyed. It's okay, just, but it is, the more you do know, the more you can help your person that you're collaborating with on digitizing, the less surprised you might be with the result. But you're not alone if you can't figure out we have cases where people have put it on slow speed for one part of the tape and then have switched off to another mid, because there's taping a different dance and it's a different technician who did it. They'll figure it out. They will. If they're any good at all, they'll figure it out and they'll fix that transfer for you. And then, okay, now you've got all this digital stuff, and I can't help you strategize with digital file storage. Especially if you have gigabytes to terabytes to petabytes. It's beyond my imagination. It's like counting dollars that millionaires have or billionaires have. It's more than I can imagine. So this is where you really do need to get somebody who does do this well and decide what works for you. It could be the cloud, it could be hard drives. Just make sure you're naming your files well, at least for your own, the ones that you're going to be using. Make sure you can retrieve them and you won't write over them. So, okay. So this was created, hard drive server versus the cloud. And looking back, I think that really we didn't like either one. There are also things now that are digital tapes called LTOs that are used for storage, which are meant to store great gobs of digital files. That's a possibility as well. They look like nothing like a VHS. It's a square little box-like thing. But, there are all kinds of problems, which is why get more than one copy if you possibly can, certainly for your access files. Store it in more than one place, or make sure that the person or firm you're working with is reassuring you with a plan of how these problems won't happen to you. But I have to say, I really enjoyed this about the cloud because DTH wanted to upload all of their preservation size files up to their cloud. And as it says here, with home bandwidth, and they did not have high-speed stuff. They were pretty much they were frugal. So they were not trying to get lightning speed kinds of connections. A 2-hour VHS tape, losslessly compressed with JPEG 2000, that's their wrapper, is about 70 gigabytes, 2.18 megabits per second upload. And how many days is it going to take to upload that one file? 3. So this, then, of course, one of the technicians found this lovely thing. Relax, your data will be backed up in 234,223 days. And so I think for your preservation files, cloud is not an option, but it might be for your access files, which are much, much smaller, you know. But at any rate, just to kind of give you a sense of the scale, once you get that preservation size file, I just find it extremely daunting. I think we may be at the end. Not quite. Oh, okay. More on file management. But I think we've talked about this also with, you know, never alter your preservation copy. And link your documentation to, when I say asset, it's really item. It's the physical thing. To the appropriate asset. It's often the physical thing. It can be a digital asset. You don't need to know this at all. And then see, there's tons of stuff on PB Core is a public broadcasting way of description, but you don't need to worry about that. So here's a few resources. I will send these to you by email if you'd like recommended file formats. I would much rather have University of Michigan recommend than me. Yes, if you would. Yeah, I'd like to send it to all of you. Then you will also, because the Library of Congress protects its staff by not letting us list our email online. So we don't spend all our time answering spams or whatever. And so, you know, if you share your email with me, then I can welcome you and also send you all the information, including Beth's connections to the Texas area resources. So that would be great. Yes. So I think we're sort of at the end of what I'd brought along. And now we can think about maybe the deeds of gifts and whether you really want to choose a repository. And when I say in repository, it's who is holding on to the things you want to deposit that's supposed to be having safeguarding all of the materials that you have. And think creatively. You know, the thing of it is, if you have a lot of physical items, real estate everywhere is at a premium. You know, Library of Congress cannot take everything because real estate in Washington, D.C., and also because our mission is supposed to be, you know, we're choosing things that, like Rosa Parks, that reflect the national, you know, important things. But we do have dance collections. We have wonderful music collections. We're the largest music collection in the world. But we can't take everybody's stuff, and sometimes it doesn't even make sense, because who is it that you're saving the stuff for? Who can maybe organize it and make it accessible faster for you? Who is willing to let you come in and will actually let you take things off-site? We tend to not do that. But if you needed a score or needed a recording and you went, oops, I really need to have that back at the studio for a while, can you either make me a copy or could I take it out for a day? If you're going to need to do that, then you don't want to send it to Washington. You want it to be as close up the street in a safe place as possible. So consider that. And then who's going to be interested? Universities are, especially in their region, or for their former faculty, or for some other kind of significant connection to the kind of work that you're doing. Historical societies are an unplumbed source. They also do great jobs often with small exhibits. But so they're sort of sometimes overlooked, but they might love to have an anniversary celebration around your donation of your materials. So think broadly. Museums will take some things, but oftentimes people have been disappointed because they want one of your Firebird costumes or one of something, and they don't want to have everything. And so often it's libraries or archives or historical or the university archives that are your best bet. And then as Beth was mentioning, for specific format type things, there are these initiatives around digital access that sometimes will get you a chance to give your digital things here, but these guys who are really much better with the paper stuff, they're here, but it's not going to kill a scholar or a dancer to go here and here because you're in the same city. So, I wouldn't recommend that across the miles, but if it's local, for example, NYPL typically does not take costumes, but they have a couple of other places. It might be the Metropolitan Museum of Art in some cases. It might be FIT, their Fashion Institute of Technology, that would take some things. So they kind of will work together collaboratively. And I think that makes so much sense, especially in the, age where, we do specialize, so why compromise something? If you can't take care of textiles, why would you want to put it there? Because that's going to need something different. So I hope this helps. Mm-hmm. Move those things to join the other company materials. That's a really interesting question, and also it's wonderful you're here as an education program director, because I think that's also a very natural repurposing of materials. So I'm glad that you're working on it and interested. Usually the traditional advice is don't split collections. Are you happy with the organization that currently has materials? What have they been able to do for you now that it's now 17 years into the 21st century? Are they equipped to do what you would like to see? I would test it out and see, but typically they say don't split collections. On the other hand, I know that there are cases in dance and in other theatrical arts and in even personal papers where things are split. The reasons are sometimes very different. Sometimes the organization that has taken the original things after 20 years still hasn't organized it so people can use it. And backlogs in libraries and archives everywhere, even museum, identifications can be, we all have our staff challenges. The question is, will they get where you want them to go if you talk to them? Money also has an effect. So if Baryshnikov's collection might be going in and they're helping to pay for extra staff to get it all ready and to put on an exhibit, then you've got a leapfrog problem. And do they in fact honor your materials enough that you want to do that. So sometimes those, but I would definitely go, well, we're thinking about this, what do you think of the collection? But you do your homework first. If you are thinking of, have you tried to use materials that are already there, or are you sticking mostly with your programming around Stephen's work?
So for my job, I do not get to access those things that are already.
Okay.
Simply because
So you're currently not using those, right?
yeah, I basically use it. And we also actually, for the casting project, a graduate student athlete last year,
Right. Oh, lovely.
she took about 8 months archiving our entire first 4 years. So it was an incredible mission to make happen.
Well, that's congratulations. That's huge too.
My main thought is that the types of things that we would archive for Stephen's work is very different. There's more access to key things such as like all the different videos, the videotype evidence for historical and then we also have costume designs, things that now that we have to focus on archiving and save rather than in the past when I didn't have control over it, I don't know what happened to these things. So
Okay.
there's a lot more different materials and a lot more than we have tens of thousands. So
Wow.
it's a lot.
You have tens of thousands of videos? Because if you do you know then that you hold more videos than New York Public Library's Dance Division? Or you may. You may at least have at 50% of their size, it sounds like. Yeah. So, and this is, yeah. Yes, and photographs. And all of those things, yeah. And the more you can link a work with the photos, with the videos, with the program, you're in much better shape, and it's better for you to do it than wherever you're sending it. Yes. No, this is wonderful. Just so the camera knows that she's talking about just how much multi-format collection you have, and just for one artistic director, and the challenge of this multi-format. Now, usually when it goes to the archives, we separate by format because it needs different kinds of housing. So with photographs or negatives, we try to put them in such a way we don't let them be handled without white cotton gloves. And you may even decide with your older stuff that you want to invest in some cheap cotton gloves because of the, but at any rate, but. Mm-hmm. Yes. So you've got a method in place, you know what your formats are. I mean, you are so far ahead of most companies, congratulations, because you've already have one archival relationship. I think it's wise to figure out if they can handle tens of thousands of videotapes. Also understand that it's likely that they wouldn't keep the tens of thousands. They would, and so if you can curate in advance, then you've also maybe made it possible for any archive that you approach to say yes, because it means you've done the curatorial work on the video, which is very hard for people who haven't seen all of the work or know who's cast and which one would be better. Yeah, all of that stuff. No, you're making all of the right, you could be our poster, children for, within reason, you're proceeding in a very logical, safe way, privileging how to identify things, and then you're also already looking at what are we going to use? Should we go where we did before, or do we need something different for the 21st century? And that's wonderful, because, and you're stepping from the education programs, you may be coming in from a different perspective, and then to find a place that meets both of those needs and whatever else Stephen and the board might say is a need, then you're really in very good shape. I just say, onward.
I was going to add that the Austin History Center is a good, viable place for physical archives like that. They have told me that they really don't have the capacity for digitizing, as they probably have told you already too. But I had talked to them at one time about trying to partner with some of that, and maybe I'll drag in the Texas Archive of the Moving Image as well, that kind of thing. I meant to look this up, and I'm sorry I didn't, but they, in their building, that right at 8th and Guadalupe, or 7th, I guess it is, they are having an exhibit this fall about, is it up already? Have you seen it? I think it's not. Yes, perfectly, yeah, the Austin Ballet Theater. Austin, sorry about that. But yeah, so if y'all have a chance, I'll try to send along the
that'd be
link to the exhibit info too. In Austin, yes, all kinds of dance in all over Austin.
That's great. And one of the other things which I did not pay enough attention to, and I'm actually struggling with this at the Library of Congress, is the fact that we are changing. We've already changed, I should say, from set designs and lighting designs that were on paper to digital programs. And this is a huge challenge because we don't know if these lighting designs can be seen or used, when in 10 years, when everyone's installing a different digital system to program your tech. So it's really poignant to me because I know that this is a huge burden because you can't possibly guess. We have the ABT designs from Oliver Smith, the initial ones, and Peggy Clark's lighting designs. And they are, not only does she do a plot, but she does an artistic representation of how she wants to have the light look on the Oliver Smith set. I mean, these things should be framed. And, and I'm going, what are the bits and, the little cue sheets for computer programs? What are we going to have for that? I mean, I'm also really worried. Now, see, now I get to be anxious. I'm also really worried about the fact that we aren't going to have scrapbooks anymore, that dance writing, for you, it's all difficult because the documentation of people getting excited, getting critical, debating each other about this new piece or, this new artistic director, who's shaking up things or whatever it is, that's gone. I mean, newspapers are gone. Dance Magazine is not doing its coverage the way it did in the 1960s, 70s. We have one full-time paid dance critic in the United States, compared to 60 or 70 that we had paid full-time dance critics in the 60s and we had like 60. We can all guess, right? Alistair Macaulay at the New York Times. But even the Pulitzer Prize winner at the Washington Post, Sarah Kaufman, she's assigned to other things. She does not, and so great, blogs are fantastic. I will write to you all about web archiving and all of that. I didn't get to that, but I mean, the Library of Congress now is working with some digital companies in terms of also trying to capture places where, dance writing is happening. It's really hard to find if you don't already know where it exists because, I mean, are you going to find those blogs on the Artist Legacy Toolkit? I don't think so, not without me kind of helping to point you in the right way, with the right word cloud, with the right, and now that Dance Heritage is merging with Dance USA, how long will that stay up? I mean, that's the other problem, is that digital files are great, but when you don't support your website any longer, this is probably all stuff that I shouldn't be saying on camera, but, but I am actually really nervous about this because, the scrapbooks are such a testament to worldwide touring, different people responding in different ways. I mean, even letters to the editor in Rochester after Appalachian Spring was premiered, at the Eastman House. And, the letter writers, arguing with the critic, which was great. That's functionally how we imagine blogs or these comment things should be, but they're not getting, ingested with the responses in the same way. I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm not that impressed by Twitter. And, so, but it's, this is really frightening. So, you're probably struggling yourself. How do you show that Stephen's new piece was really, so successful and it deserves more funding or more donors to take a look? And all of you too. It's individual artists. I mean, they are just, I don't know how you all manage to, work on, because the sentiment's there. But, how to get it saved, how to get more than one person to read it besides, the blogger's mother. I mean, these all are kind of precious little things that are usually for a smaller community. And, this is, put your mind to that. I mean, I'd love to think about how we could, in fact, do a better job of trying to say the digital stuff's here, but we're not using it well enough because we're not, doing something with this to give you that feedback, that feeling that we were there, and this is, what excited me.
One of our arts critics, Curator, did a lot of dance reviews, was left with for publication last year. I think it was last year. And I just saw on Facebook that she's creating a new online website for reviews. They're going to be very specific, not connected to any advertisements at all. So that's really huge. They're going to be donation dependent, but that way some of the readers are.
So we have to get enough readers. See, and that's the thing, is that people that value it enough to support things. Well, it does work for Wikipedia, because they're a nonprofit. So, I don't think dance criticism will ever be that big, but maybe we can work on it. But anyway, the other thing is that typically all of those crawlers, when you're trying to look for dance, we did a kind of prototype. What we get is the dance company sites, because you all know how to tag things, and it's all about buying tickets. But it doesn't get us to the dance writing, and that's, but you all are doing your job well for dance advertising. So, but, the rest of that stuff has to happen too. So I think I'm out of time. But it was, thank you so much for coming, and
Thank Libby for talking. That was
talking.
amazing stuff that we heard from you. Thank you.
And I hope you will, find a friend that you can share some of this with, because it's a big challenge.
Yeah, my intention here in the library is to try to keep facilitating stuff like that, so maybe in the spring we can have another session, get people to talk about their challenges and share ideas and stuff, but it's all still in the back of my head. But I have your emails. Make sure you're all on the list that we